Welcome back to CoBo Challenge 2017. And here, standing next to me, is a gentleman from New York, Mr. Klaus Biesesbach, Director of MoMA PS1. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
We're very honored to have you. So Klaus, you have just been to Hong Kong opening a new show, .com.cn, in collaboration with K11 Arts Foundation. And we know that MoMA PS1 has this long history of putting up exhibitions in unutilized spaces and abandoned spaces. And that's a strategy that PS1 has been innovating and pioneering in this kind of initiatives. How do you see this strategy, and do you think it could be something could be applied to Hong Kong?
I think New York was in the 1970s a very different city, and the founder of MoMA PS1, Alana Heiss, she had vast open spaces, unused spaces all over the city, in the Bronx, in Manhattan, in Chelsea, in Tribeca, and she found this old school building. I myself started KW in the Berlin Biennial in Berlin in the 90s, and there were vast spaces that were unused and empty. I don't really see that in Hong Kong. Hong Kong seems so densely used and populated, and it's not a city like New York in the 70s or Berlin in the 90s. So I think that's difficult to compare. But it's interesting to see that spaces like abandoned schools or factories like the one I found at KW and in Berlin are an inspiration for artists and for curators to start.
We are also moving from the physical space to the virtual space, which is also the focus of the exhibition .com.cn. How do you see the possibility of exhibiting, showing art on the internet? For example, are we moving from the post-internet era to the post-social media era?
I'm often asked, why is there not more art on the internet? And I always compare it with the question, why is there not more art on the telephone? Telephone is a way to communicate, and it's and it changed the world. But why should art happen on the telephone? Why should art happen on the internet? I think there's no reason for it so much. So .com.cn is about art that is possible today because the artists research or they use techniques that are informed by digital procedures or digital media. So the art we show is either inspired or would not be possible without digital media or the internet. But it's not, it's painting and sculpture, it's photography, it's objects, it's interventions. So it's not that the form is necessarily digital. I think that's an important thing. .com.cn takes its point of origin due to the fact that when I do a studio visit, I ask the artist normally, what are the websites you're looking at? And it's actually surprising that it's very few websites. So I do this all the time. I did so many studio visits in Beijing, in Shanghai, in Hong Kong. And so it's interesting to hear different websites being used here because there is no direct connection so easily between the websites an artist in Munich uses or the artist websites in use in Beijing. So that led to the idea that it's actually not one World Wide Web. It's actually several World Wide Webs. And so there is, at least we do this exhibition about two, the one in the Western countries and the one in China. But we do them on equal footing. There's not like, oh, this is larger or bigger or more accessible. It's very equal footing, it's very democratic. And I think what's interesting is that the social media or your hardware or your computer or the algorithms of search engines, if you have them or not, offer you different results. So if you look for something here or there, your result might be different, or the image you find might be different. So I think .com.cn lives off the productive difference that there is between different approaches. And so the artists anticipate forms, the artists create and imagine certain visionary forms. So the exhibition actually takes this as a question, in which of the World Wide Webs are you? From which perspective How do you disseminate information? Are you focusing information? Are you spreading information? So these are all structural and content-related questions that the artists deal with, and that's fascinating for a curator. We were not commissioning art. We were only looking for existing art, and I can only be very congratulatory and grateful to K11, because K11 has an amazing research structure, has an amazing system, an amazing staff, and they helped us for the last 2 years really do these studio visits and also collect the information, process the information, and they collaborated on making this exhibition possible. So a huge thank you to K11. K11 has both the infrastructure for the exhibition and the analog objects and the exhibition making and all the communication needed, but it also has the generosity and curiosity to look at emerging artists, and that is something that MoMA PS1 I think is very specialized in, to do research, to look for new form, relevant content, and somehow brings this together in a thought-provoking exhibition.
One last question. You're regular Instagram user, and you have also very curate Instagram strategy as well. Are you still posting things these days while you're in Hong Kong?
I posted all my 50s, or many of my 50 studio visits from 2 years ago, and often worked with the artists closely on creating an image or a little video. I'm doing this right now, and I'm trying to communicate what the exhibition is about, but I'm also sharing a little bit like a traveling eye, what I'm seeing and the impressions. For example, we drove by a setting north of Beijing, which was really interesting, and we still don't know what it was. It looked like a huge frozen waterfall, like a wall of water, of ice, but it was actually quite warm. And there was a creek, a river in the front, and there were camping chairs and camping equipment. You could barbecue there, and families were just using it for barbecue, and it looked like Game of Thrones, this huge setting of this frozen wall. We still don't know if that's
surreal.
Absolutely, and we don't know if that was a movie set or if that's real ice, but so I was just saying, I actually hoped that somebody on Instagram would say, oh, that was a movie set and it's plastic, but no answer yet, so I haven't found that out.
So that's in your most recent Instagram post. Well, we have to check out your Instagram. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.